Good evening. So it seems as though something has led you to the campsite of the Orator. Well, as you can see, I've stoked the fire, which means it's time for you to pull up your chair and settle in, because tonight, I have another tale to tell. You know, if you were to turn on the Travel Channel a few years ago, you might see a story about a family who lived in a purportedly haunted house. In fact, this house was so haunted that local responders, firefighters, and police officers were actually nervous to go inside of this house. And this family, they experienced so many different terrifying events that they didn't even know what to do. But eventually, their mind was made up for them, because after only 3 short years, they had to flee their house or die. But before we begin, if you find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand, true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is every single day. I do shorts all 7 days of the week, and then I upload long-form content Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, all of my stories, as I mentioned, are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story comes from us from Redditor Storm Sybil, and I will make sure to link her original story below. But if you or anybody you know has a story, and you think that it would fit well on my channel, then please reach out to me on any of my social media, and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially one day feature it here on The Orator. And lastly, I have to give a two-piece thing here. Number one is the apology. Last week was just this really crazy week. We had Mother's Day, and then my daughter's birthday was right after that. And the day before Mother's Day, I was doing wrestling commentary at a wrestling promotion that I worked for, and I had to kind of pull double duty, and I was the MC as well. And after all that, I lost my voice, and then I was so busy on Mother's Day and my daughter's birthday, and it was just so difficult to get a video out. So I do apologize for losing Monday's video, but I have a couple cool things to make up for it. Number one, tonight's story is going to be incredible. You're going to love it. It is terrifying. Number two, on Monday, I'm going to drop a special because this weekend I'm going camping, and me and some friends of mine are going to tell some scary stories around a campfire, and I'm going to upload those stories as kind of like a live telling on Monday night at 8 p.m. And lastly, and perhaps most exciting for me, is that we are closing in on 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much, every single person who subscribes, comments, watches the videos. I literally could not do this without you. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. When we hit 1,000, I'm going to do a big giveaway contest. I got some merch and some other cool stuff that I'm working on. And so thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's story. It is a tale that I call Lacking Oxygen. So Sybil and Harry, they're married and they have 2 boys. And Sybil is pregnant with her 3rd child, their first girl. And they're so excited about having a family of 5 and finally rounding it out and being done. However, their house that they're currently living in is just a little bit too small for a family of 5, so they start searching for a new house. And they finally find this perfect rental. It is at the end of this, dead-end road on a cul-de-sac. And so there's this house, and there's only a couple other houses there, and then across from them is this old church. And then beyond that cul-de-sac, it's basically nothing but like cotton fields. And so they feel relatively isolated, and they don't have a ton of neighbors, and it's not crazy busy, which means that their kids will have room to play outside and kind of hang out, and they don't have to worry too much about traffic and things like that. And then the house itself is perfect. It's this little 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. It's got a nice wraparound porch. It's blue and beautiful, and it's just everything that they wanted. But when they first get in this house to kind of check it out, Sybil notices that it's a little bit weird. For one thing, when she walks into the kitchen, all of the cabinets are inexplicably open in this house, and that doesn't really make sense. And then the other thing that's a little bit weird is, as they're going throughout the house, they kind of have a plan where they're going to have their bedroom, the boys' bedroom, and then, of course, a nursery for the new baby. And they find the perfect room for the nursery. It's the biggest room in the house. It lets in a ton of natural sunlight, and they think it's just perfect. But when they walk into that bedroom, even though from the outside it's bright and really nice, when they walk in, there's this weird, it almost feels like it's dark, which doesn't make sense because, like I said, there's this window wide open, tons of natural sunlight. It's very bright in there. It just has this weird dark feeling. But other than that, the house is like perfect. The layout's great, the location is exactly what they want, and the price is exactly what they want. And so they take this house and they move in, and almost immediately this house shows all the signs of an extremely haunted house. So it's a bunch of different stuff that happens, and almost all of it is stuff that you've heard before. Lights flickering, electronics and stuff like that going on and off when they're not supposed to, hearing voices and footsteps in the house, seeing shadows out of the corner of your eyes. There was one time when inexplicably, and they had experts come over and look, the walls were leaking clear fluid as if the walls were crying. And then, of course, they had people come over, construction people, to check it out and see if something was structurally wrong with their house. And at this point, this was after the tears had fallen and it was dry at this point, and they checked and they said, nothing's leaking, everything seems sealed properly, we don't really know what's going on. And so there was just a ton of activity all over in this house, but the main area where this activity sort of seemed like focused or centralized was the nursery. So this nursery, for the first year or so, it was just, like I said, really odd, very dark, very ominous. But it seemed like the things that were happening around the house were centralized here. So much so, and it got so bad that they ended up taking their daughter out of that room and literally closing and locking that room. And then all of 3 of the children slept in one bedroom, and that was just a vacant room. But they didn't just leave it empty. They filled that room. And they filled it with all of the toys in the house where their batteries had died, but the toys continued to turn on and work, even though it's impossible. And so, whenever that would happen to a new toy, they'd take it, they'd unlock that door, they'd chuck it in there, and they'd lock that door back up. And these kind of things, they went on for, like I said, they were there for 3 years. This is like the first year, 2.5 years of this house, where all of these things are continually happening. And then things start to escalate even more. One night, Harry, he's on the bed, and he's getting ready to turn off the light. Now, in their house, they have one of those ceiling fans overhead, and so there's 2 different cords. You can pull the cord that will make the ceiling fan go faster or slower, and then there's the other cord that turns the light on and off. And so Harry, he's on his knees, and he's getting ready to pull this light switch off, and then all of a sudden, while he's up there, they hear this growling from the foot of the bed. Now, they did have a dog. However, their dog was actually out in the living room with Sybil's mom. Sybil's mom, she's getting a little bit on in years, and she was kind of watching her, and she was staying at their house and kind of living there for a while. And so, the dog, they know for a fact, is out there asleep at Sybil's mom's feet, and there's this growling coming from the foot of the bed. And even though it doesn't make sense, they both lean over, peer in, see what this could possibly be. And as they're looking for this growling sensation, all of a sudden, Sybil's leg starts to hurt, and she pulls up her pajamas, and they look at her leg, and there are these 3 kind of red dots, and all of a sudden, before their very eyes, her leg, these 3 little dots, they start to blister as if she's being burned. But there's nothing there. There's no heat. There's nothing. It's very, very odd. And so, of course, right away, she starts screaming and she's hitting to get something away. There's nothing there. And at some point, they end up getting up, leaving the house, and Harry takes Sybil to the hospital. And they go and they talk to the doctor, and he checks it, and he's like, yep, these are definitely burn marks. And as he's looking, he's like, I can't even tell exactly what made them. It doesn't look like something was pressed into your skin. It's just these 3 perfectly circled burn marks. And he just couldn't figure it out. And so he prescribed her something for the burn and basically sends her on her way. In this house, it continues to experience activity. And Sybil, Harry, and Sybil's mom, they just continue kind of putting up with it. And so this is just another night. Sybil is asleep. Harry is actually gone. He's a musician. He travels a lot on the road. And so this is one of the times where he's gone, sometimes for days, sometimes even weeks. And so Sybil's there with her mom, all 3 kids, and everybody's asleep. It's the middle of the night when, out of the blue, Sybil is woken up by her mom being on top of her. And she's whispering, kind of doing one of these whisper screams. She's going, the kids, they're screaming and crying in the nursery. And Sybil, she kind of wakes up and she would, what? And she's like, the kids, they're crying. They're crying, the children, they're crying in the nursery. And Sybil, she's like, Mom, the nursery's locked. No one's even allowed in there. We don't put the kids there. And Sybil's mom, she's like, I know. Our kids are asleep. There are babies crying in the nursery. And then that kind of wakes Sybil up all the way, like, what? And she listens, and sure enough, from that nursery room, she can hear kids screaming and crying in there. And so her and her mom, they jump up and they tentatively walk down this hallway. They're obviously terrified. Then they eventually get to this door, and as they're walking close to the door, the screams and the cries are getting louder and louder, and they're clearly emanating from this room. And so she takes the key, she puts it in, turns the lock, and then 1, 2, 3, she rips the door open. And as soon as the door opens, it's silent. And so they step into the room and they're looking around. There's nothing there at all. And then suddenly they hear crying again, only this time it sounds like it's coming from outside of that bedroom. And so Sybil, right away, she does an about face. She runs out that bedroom door, down the hallway, out the front door, and around to see if maybe they misheard and somebody really is hurt and outside. And she runs around, and now she's on one side of the window and her mom is on the other, and she can hear the crying and screaming of the kids. And now it's definitely coming from the other side of the window inside the house, but her mom is standing right there and there is nobody else in the house. And so, of course, she goes back inside, and her mom are utterly terrified. And they're sitting there, and they're listening to this crying, and it's still going. And so, with nothing else to do, they end up leaving the room, closing it, locking the door, and they just go and sit on the couch until sunrise. And for the next couple hours throughout the night, they heard these kids crying in the nursery. And then the sun rose, and then the kids, all of a sudden, that crying just stopped. And they're sitting there in silence, and it's like, none of this even makes any sense, but this is just sort of the things that they had been putting up with in this house for so long. And actually, this event would traumatize Sybil's mom so badly that she ended up moving out, and she really urged Sybil and Harry to do the same thing, but she said she just couldn't take the house anymore, especially after that night with the babies crying, and that was it. She left, and she just never came back. And so now Sybil and Harry, they're alone in this house, but Harry, he's still a musician. He still leaves often. And now when he's gone, it's Sybil alone in this house. And things start happening to her that start escalating things, namely sleepwalking. So Sybil, she doesn't do normal sleepwalking. It's not like she wakes up one night and all of a sudden she's in front of the refrigerator, or she finds herself outside or something like that. One night, she goes to sleep. Her last memory is of getting in bed and going to sleep. And then her next memory is of being pulled over on the side of the road in her vehicle by a police officer, and he's standing at her window tapping on the glass for her to roll down the window. And so she's like confused, and she rolls down the window, and the officer's like, hey, what's going on? And Sybil, she doesn't want to admit, like, hey, I don't know, I just woke up. And so she tells the officer, one of my babies is sick, and I was just running to the pharmacy to get them medicine. And so this police officer, he actually escorts her to the pharmacy and then back, and he doesn't end up going inside because he knows this house is really weird. And at this point, the first responders, they've come a few times. They thought that there was an intruder, and it turned out that nobody was there. And they've come a couple times when all this weirdness has happened. And so even the local authorities, the police officers, firefighters, stuff like that, they've been to this house for a couple times, and they know now that this house is a little bit weird. And so he escorts her back. He makes sure everything is okay. And that's pretty much it. She goes back inside, and her kids, they're still asleep. Luckily, nothing happened. But she's like freaked out. Like, I was gone, and my husband was gone, and my 3 little babies were here alone, and I don't have an explanation as to why this is happening. Another time she's sleepwalking, suddenly her husband, Harry, he's in her face yelling at her to wake up, what are you doing? And she kind of comes to and wakes up, and she's like, what are you talking about? And Harry's like, Sybil, you were just at our kids' room, and you were telling them to get outside, to get out of the house, to get out of here. He's like, and then when I questioned you and asked you what you were doing, you just turned around and walked into the kitchen. And Sybil's like, what are you talking about? We're asleep. And he's like, Sybil, look around you. And that's when she sort of takes in the environment, and she realizes she's not asleep like she remembered doing. She is awake, standing in the kitchen. All 3 of her kids are standing there. They're looking very confused and kind of frightened. And her husband's like, what is going on? And so Sybil, terrified by this, decides that what she's going to do is she's going to get a second job at the hospital where she fills IVs and kind of makes sure all that stuff is taken care of. And that will get her through the like kind of early evening to middle of the night, and then she will come home, and that's typically when the activity is strongest, like around 3 a.m. right in the middle of the night. So she'll get home, she'll stay up through the night and make sure nothing bad happens and that she doesn't sleepwalk and leave or something crazy like that. And then she started sleeping during the day. And she did this as much as she could, but naturally, even with such an odd schedule, on occasion, you're going to sleep at night. And so it is one of those nights. She's asleep at night. She knows that it's okay because Harry is also there. And so she knows if something weird happens and she gets up and sleepwalks and leaves the house, at least, their father's there and her husband's there and everything's taken care of. And so she's not super worried about it. So she goes to sleep. Everything seems normal. But then in the middle of the night, she wakes up and she can tell that Harry is in front of her and his silhouette is sort of outlined by the computer. And so she can see him, and she's like, hey, what are you doing? And he's not answering her, and she thinks it's really weird, so she looks over to the side, to his side of the bed. She sees that it is indeed empty, and then she looks back up, and Harry is suddenly gone. And she's really freaked out by this. And then, as she's trying to assess what is going on, her blanket that she's covered up with starts getting tugged away from her by nothing. There's nothing in this room, and this blanket is getting tugged off her. And so, of course, she grabs onto the blanket, and she's trying to hold on to it, and it's like almost this tug of war instance going on. And as she's playing tug of war with this blanket, all of a sudden the room gets ice cold, and then the walls, there starts banging on the walls. Boom, boom, boom. And then in addition to the banging on the walls, her shutters on the windows start going up, down, up, down. And then they have this window air conditioning unit, and it starts going low, medium, high, low, medium, high. And so in rhythm with each other, there's bang, bang, flip, flip, beep, 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 all at the same time in this ice cold room. And this whole time, this thing is tugging on her blanket, and at some point, it rips the blanket out of her hands, and that's enough for Sybil. She jumps up, and she starts screaming, and then Harry busts into the door. Remember, he's not in the room. He busts in the door. He looks ill. He's pale and sickly, and he has clearly just been throwing up in the bathroom. And he runs in. He's like, what is going on? And as soon as he runs in, everything stops. The banging on the walls, the air conditioning unit, the flapping of the window panel. And so Harry, he comes in, but he heard it. So he knows something crazy is going on. And he's like, what happened? And she tells him the story. And, it's one of those things, he provides her comfort. But this is just the house that they live in. And this kind of stuff happens all the time. And so Harry and Sybil, they do eventually fall asleep. But then they wake up the next morning, and Sybil has the worst headache that she's ever felt in her life. She thinks she gets migraines sometimes, but this is something else. This is horrible. And so she wakes Harry up, and she feels horrible and weak. She's like, Harry, you need to go get my medicine. Please go get my medicine. I have a migraine. And so Harry, he gets out of bed. He seems really lethargic and slow, and he takes a couple of steps toward the door, and he collapses onto the floor. And he turns and says, Sybil, something's wrong. You got to go get the kids. And so Sybil, she gets up, and she starts stumbling out the door and into the hallway, and she's making her way through the house, and she's really weak, and she's tired, and she makes it to the kitchen, and she looks down, and there is her 5-year-old son on the kitchen floor, unconscious, on his stomach, just laying there at the stove. And so she gets down and she grabs him. She's going to scoop him up to pick him up to take him outside. And then she slumps over and she passes out. And then her next memory is of her husband shoving her, trying to wake her up. And he says, hey, you got to get him outside. I'm going to go get our daughter. Hurry up. You got to wake up. And so she, comes to, and she grabs her son and she slowly drags him outside. And, at this point, it's like he's like 7 years old, but he shouldn't be that heavy, but she's so tired and her body is hurting and her head is pounding and she can't think straight, but she drags her son outside and sets him down on the porch. And then she has to go back in because she still has her other 2 kids, and her husband said he's going to grab her daughter, but he hasn't come out yet. And so she makes her way back inside the house, and she slowly stumbles through the living room and the kitchen, down the hall, And at the entrance to the kid's bedroom door is her husband. He's unconscious. He fell down. He's gone now. And so she stumbles over to him, and she knows she needs to wake him up, but she is so tired, she can't even lean down. She thinks, if I try to lean down, I'm going to fall over, and then we're both going to be unconscious, and that's it. And so she starts literally kicking her husband. Get up. Harry, you got to get up. And he stirs, and he finally starts to come to. She says, I'm going to get our daughter, you get our son. And she opens the door, and she sees her daughter. And her daughter's on the bed. She's like 3 years old, 30 pounds, so tiny. And she's blue and cold. And it looks like she's dead. And Sybil, she stumbles over and she grabs her daughter and she's carrying her out. And even though her daughter's only 30 pounds, it's like she's exhausted. It's so heavy. And she stumbles, she finally makes it outside. She sets her daughter down. And then her husband comes out behind her and he drops their last son, and then he collapses. And it's like Sybil, her brain was just not working right. Something was obviously wrong in the house. And then now she's seeing all this and she sees her daughter, and her daughter is very clearly dead. And Sybil, she's so distraught and confused that she stumbles back into the house and she thinks, I'm going to call 911 so they can come take care of Harry and my boys, and then I'm just going to stay in this house because if my daughter's gone, I don't want to be here. Now remember, Sybil is not thinking the clearest, right? Something is going on, and this is her thought process. So she stumbles back into the house, and she gets her cell phone, and she starts calling 911, and as she's talking, she realizes she's so lightheaded, she's not going to be able to complete this phone call. And so she stumbles back outside just to complete this phone call, and she sees her daughter starting to stir and sit up. Now, her daughter's still confused and very blue, but she is alive. And so Sybil, she, finishes this 911 call, tells them what's going on, and then she goes and she takes her kids, and they all get them out onto the lawn, away from the house. And no sooner do they do that than paramedics and firefighters and police, they all start to arrive to figure out what's going on. Now, remember, they're used to responses at this house. This house constantly has issues. And so they show up in force because this 911 call was desperate. And they have gas masks and hazmat and everything on. They go inside the house and they measure the carbon monoxide levels, and it's over 500 parts per million, which is a totally lethal dose. And they have been in this house breathing this for they don't even know how long. And so they try to figure out, they go throughout the entire house to see what could have happened and how this gas leak could have occurred, and they can't find anything. There's nothing that seems to be leaking. They test the carbon monoxide poisoners. They all seem to be working just fine. Something should have alerted this family, and yet it didn't. And so, they finally make their way outside, and they start questioning the family to see what could have possibly happened. And they're talking to the oldest boy, the one that they found in the kitchen, passed out at the stove. And so they're talking to him, and he said that a little boy that he didn't recognize, woke him up in the middle of the night and said, hey, there's a gas leak. You got to come stop it right now. And so this boy, their oldest, he stumbles out with this other boy's help, this phantom child, to the stove. And sure enough, all of the burners were turned all the way on for gas, but no fire was going. And so, obviously this is coming out later as they question it, but when Sybil found this out, she's thinking, we did not even cook that weekend. Nobody used the stove. There's no way that this is possible. And so they talk to her, and they try to figure out what else is going on, and then they move to the little girl. And now, at this point, the little girl, she's like 2.5, 3 years old, right? They've been here for a few years, and now she's a little bit older. And they talk to her, and they kind of piece this together, that she was in the living room, and she was playing with what sounds like the same boy that alerted their oldest to the gas leak. And then she's playing with him, and she's also playing with this black cat in the living room, when suddenly she sees her mom dragging her body out the front door, which is what actually happened. And when that happened, the boy and the cat led her back to her body, and then that's when she woke back up, apparently. And so we have this little boy who led the one kid to the stove, and he turns off all the gas, and then he promptly passes out. And then that same boy apparently went and helped the little girl find her body again, like this astral projection or something like that. And their description of this boy was basically exactly the same. Same age, height, hair color, clothing, everything like that. And so, of course, that's really terrifying. And so, the police officers and all the other first responders, they're left to wonder how this family's even alive. I mean, they were in there asleep for hours with a lethal dose of gas, and they're still somehow all okay. Now, naturally, they needed to be tended to, especially the little girl, but eventually they would make a full recovery, and then that was it. They were like, enough of this. This literally almost cost our whole family our lives. We're getting the heck out of this house. And so they do. They pack up and they get ready to move, and they find a new place, and they get everything out of there. And then on the very last night, Sybil comes back, and she's just doing a once through the entire house, make sure everything's okay. Her entire family is now moved into the new house, and so she's not worried about that anymore. And she's doing a walkthrough of the house, and then all of a sudden she hears ding dong on the front door. And she turns and she goes and she looks out the peephole, and she sees her neighbor standing out there, and just behind him is his car, and it's on and the lights are flashing forward, so she has a pretty good view of everything. And so then she turns and opens the door, and as soon as she opens it, there's nobody out there. No neighbor, no car, totally empty. Again, this is the house, so she just closes the door, she locks it, she's like, of course. And then all of a sudden, as soon as she locks it and closes it, it's like something hits her, like this wave hits her. And she feels cold and nauseous and confused and scared, and she can't breathe. And so she has this asthma inhaler in the bedroom. She knows that she left it in there. And so she's like, I can't breathe. I got to get to this thing. And so she runs down the hall to get to this inhaler, and then that's the last thing she remembers. Next thing, she's awake, but somehow she's standing as she kind of comes to, and then she gets thrown against the living room wall. She hits it and kind of crumples down to her feet. And then she is freezing cold. She said she was colder than she's ever been before. She felt hypothermic. She thought she was literally going to freeze to death. And so she makes her way to her feet, and she runs to the bathroom, and she's thinking, I'm going to just run a hot shower and get in there so I can warm my body up because I'm that cold. And so she runs to the shower, she takes her shirt off, and as she's taking her shirt off, her cell phone falls out of her shirt, and she grabs it and picks it up, and she's like, I should call, Harry and make sure that everything's okay. So she calls him, and she's like, you're not going to believe this, but she tells him what happened and how she woke up and she was freezing, and she's like, I just need to get warm. And Harry's like, Sybil, you've been gone for 5 hours, and I've been calling you, and I texting you, and I didn't even know where you were or what was going on. And so that was it for Sybil. She said, all right, if I've been gone for 5 hours and I don't even know what happened, then I got to get out of this house. And that was it. She just turned around, she left that house, and she never went back again. So that's going to do it for today's story. If you found yourself enjoying this story or any of the other ones on my channel, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is every single day. I do shorts all 7 days of the week, and then I upload long-form content Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, like I said, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, just reach out to me on any of my social media, and we'll find time to get together, collect your story, and potentially feature it one day here on The Orator. And so until next time, where you may pull up your chair and settle in, the fire will be stoked, and I will have another tale to tell.